Well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us so we basically resume the NLP and the large language model seminar. So starting with the joint lab discussion. So basically we expect or encourage our postdocs and also trainees to present their work or share, more recent literature. So hopefully we can keep up a momentum for knowing or keep up to date the recent literature for those topics, and also to have more like critical analysis. So today we have two trainees and also faculty members. One's Brian, our associate research scientist at BITS, and one Xiang, recently new postdoc. So Brian will introduce a large language model, for example, for interpreting large language models for embedding space. That's potentially a billionaire or maybe $1 billion idea. We don't know yet, but maybe. And also for Xiang to talk about multimodal large language model with images and time series data. So let's welcome them. Thanks. Available on Zoom, right? Yeah.
And people on Zoom can hear. Hey, thank you, Xiang, and thanks everyone for coming. As Xiang said, I'm in ARS. I'm in Dr. Shu's lab. If you don't know me, my name is Brian, and we do a lot of work with embedding spaces for especially biomedical literature visualization and analysis. So that's mapping historical knowledge, but also potentially predicting future knowledge. And some of these applications are what drove this particular work, which is kind of implementing a method that will help us in our broader goal. So first of all, we're going to talk about what even are embeddings, and then why do we care about interpreting them? So as many of you that work with LLMs probably know, an embedding is, put simply, a fixed length vector capturing the semantics of variable length text. So for example, in this diagram here, with the laser pointer, every point here is going to be a paper, abstract, some research contribution, and it's laid out semantically. In this case, reduced to just 2 dimensions with UMAP, and it's just showing that papers on similar topics are going to cluster together. So this is a numerical space that captures semantics of language rather than sequences of words, which are discrete. And this is very fundamental for machine learning because text needs to be processed as numbers for these algorithms to work. They're usually hundreds to thousands of dimensions, but for a given embedding model, it's always the same number of dimensions. And importantly, this has to be pooled from token embeddings. You don't get this for free from LLMs. Unlike, say, in a computer vision model, you can take the top layer because it's always 256 by 256 or whatever. Every paragraph is a different length. So we need to do something about that to create a fixed length embedding. And that typically involves the pooling and then training that pooling and training fine-tuning the entire model with some kind of contrastive objective. The focus of that is not this talk, so I won't go too into the details, but assume we have these fixed length representations of almost any semantics you could think of, any thought or idea you want to express in a vector. So, okay, that's great. These are really useful. Why do we actually need to interpret them? Why can't we just use them for our RAG, our similarity search, our classification, etc.? Well, there are a few reasons. And so first of all, transparency. Many of you may remember, this seems like forever ago, but when Word2Vec came out, there was a lot of interest in how it seemed to make analogies that were unsettling, like the famous one, man is to woman as computer scientist is to homemaker. And that is a product of how they learn from their data. So we want to know why these embedding spaces have certain directions, and why, say, when you're using them for sentiment classification or even for RAG, why it's making these choices. What do these different dimensions in the vectors mean? Another is we might want to control generation. So it's one thing to tell an LLM, make me a new paper, make me a new movie plot. But if you can identify axes in an embedding space, and move papers along or move an embedding along that axis, you have more quantitative control over certain aspects of the content. Another might be prompt compression. If an LLM can know as much about a paragraph from one token or a 1,000-dimensional vector as it can from 1,000 tokens that were in the original, maybe you could save some money when sending this to your favorite LLM. And finally, the application that really drove our work in this area was novel recommendations, especially in our case, scientific papers or conclusions. If you have a space where all your current scientific knowledge is embedded, you could look at what's empty in that space, essentially. See where are the regions that aren't really explored yet and what might be there. You could reverse engineer that space and create something that's hypothetical. So for example, this is our kind of a prototype within Bike or Midvis, sorry, our visualization system, where you might be able to click somewhere that there's no paper and it'll tell you, here's the paper that would be there, or here's the conclusion. And a hypothetical conclusion you could just call a hypothesis. This is something you could investigate. So to do this, just looking at the literature, we found something called embedding language models on the pattern of vision language models or other multimodal, where they will take in tokens and embeddings, just like they could take in tokens and pictures, which would actually be in the form of embedded pictures. So this is pretty recent, developed by a team at Google Research. And they originally demonstrated for the domain of film reviews, again, for this kind of novel content creation, like what are the types of films that haven't been explored and can we make them or write about them? This is the paper. It was at iClear. It's more on the theoretical side. So there was no code, no data, very few implementation details. So we had a lot of work to do to kind of recapitulate this work. But even though it's movies, you can see how this might be very relevant. So here's an overview of how it works. Here where they have embedding, that's actually going to be the embedding itself, not a token. And that's going to be fed directly into a language model with some adapter, which here they call E sub A. But a language model, that's just going to be noise to it at first. It's not going to know. It's used to looking at embeddings of tokens. If you give it a full embedding, it's never seen that before. It doesn't know what to do with it. So you have to train it. And to train it, the idea they came up with was we have a bunch of tasks that would require knowing what's in that embedding. Like describe a person that would like this movie, or write a description of the movie, write a review of the movie. And then you have some gold standard outputs. And by training against those outputs, you hope the model learns to interpret the embedding of the text rather than the in-text. And the cool thing that happens once you do that is that the embedding no longer has to come from an original piece of text. Almost all embeddings we have is because you took a paragraph, you put it through an embedder. But what if you took some other number, some other vector of numbers? You could feed it into this and it could tell you, for example, this new point, this hypothetical embedding, what is that? You could write a review of it. You could write a person that would like it. You could write the movie plot. And they did some cool things that are very relevant to our goals with literature, like interpolating. Here's the vector embedding of Forrest Gump. Here's the vector embedding of Inception. If you do some math, add them together, divide by 2, basically take the mean of them, feed it into the model with this prompt, describe the movie, and then you give it the numbers. Now it's talking about this character that sounds a lot like Forrest Gump, but then he's controlling his dreams and helping other people with that. So that's pretty cool. And another example, that was interpolation. What about extrapolation? So if you know some direction in your space that, say, represents funnier movies go this way, you can add that vector to an embedding, decode it, and here you have your version of Forrest Gump, but now it says the movie is unique in its humor. So this is trying to convince someone to watch this movie, and it knows that this is a funny movie. Or what are the 5 great characteristics of this? And you give it that shifted embedding, and you can see it knows that it's Forrest Gump, but it's also saying that it has this excellent voice cast and beautifully animated. So this is cool. I don't know if we're going to get Tom Hanks on board for this, but it's interesting, and this is kind of what we want to do for literature. So that's that paper. So the task is, how do we implement this? So I'm going to introduce CT-ELM, which is our clinical trial ELM. So first of all, we needed a data set. So we found this PubMed RCT set. This is a very nice, clean set of abstracts that are all about clinical trials. So they're very consistent, and they're structured, which is helpful. So they have like some aims or methods. It's normalized to actually background, objectives, results, methods, conclusion. This is from 2017, structured and labeled. This is the size. So it's about 200,000, mostly training. And then we have these small validation test sets. We also need some tasks. So we can't say, write a positive review of this paper. That's not really a thing, although in peer review might be, but we don't really have that data set. So we came up with these tasks, write a specific section. So this is unique to biomedical literature. So what are the methods of this paper? But you're giving it the embedding rather than the paper. And it would need to know a lot about abstracts and that particular abstract to be able to extract that information. Another is embed to abstract, just an inversion task, provide the text. Another is plain language summary. And then we have some that actually use two embeddings, which they also did in the Google paper. And you could say something like, what are the commonalities? What are the differences? And then you provide actually two vector embeddings in place of tokens. For architecture, we chose to use Llama 3.1 8 billion instruct, very versatile, open source, pretty powerful, but lightweight. And we'll break it down here into two basic parts. First, the token embedding layer. As you might know, tokens are discrete objects. To get them into a machine learning space, you need to make a one-hot vector, and then you need to project to the token embedding layer, not to be confused with the end embedding. This is just a shallow embedding, kind of like a word-to-vec embedding that's learned. So we have here just this linear mapping of our one-hot matrix or one-hot vector T with this matrix W sub E, the embedding layer. Now we're going to add something else here, though, because we have embeddings here that we can't look up in our one-hot vector. So, our matrix. This is going to be, we'll call it an adapter. It's an MLP, a very simple MLP. And the job of this is to convert the space of this embedding to a space or to an embedding that the LLM can understand. And that will bypass the token embedding layer. So every token will go through the standard token embedder. Every embedding will go through our new adapter layer, and we want to align them to the same space. So the transformer layers can read every position just like it could before. So the overall workflow is, we'll start with those structured abstract sections. We concatenate them. So now we have just paragraphs of abstracts with no headers. And then we're going to embed them with any standard embedding model, and this is going to be frozen the whole time. And now we have embeddings of clinical trials. And now we ask our Llama model, our would-be ELM, to do these tasks. But every time there's an embedding here, that goes into the adapter. When there's a token, it goes into the token layer. And we're going to train both the transformer layers and the adapter. That linear token embedder will stay frozen. And that's going to give us all these outputs. The first couple we know the real answer because that was what we fed into the embedder originally. The next couple for like plain language summaries, commonalities, differences, we don't have, but we do have LLMs. So we can just generate these. And this does not have to be the same model. So you can use the state of the art. You don't need the weights. You don't need to train it. We're just generating the data. So we use GPT-4o Mini for this. We call it the Oracle because it can see the real abstract. It doesn't have to go through the embedding and interpret it. And just as a sanity check, we have some humans review these to make sure they're accurate and high quality, and we find that they are. So now we have all our gold standard data. All we have to do is train this with token level negative log likelihood loss. So this is just like any other supervised fine-tuning task that you might fine-tune a large language model on, except now the loss is going to be propagated also through this adapter. Yeah.
The human review, expert review part, how many when did you review?
We did,
Up, down, or did you give them more?
It depended on the task. For the plain language summaries, we had a 5-point scale for accuracy, simplicity, fluency, and maybe one other, but we only did, I think, 50. Yeah.
Who did you got them?
Nat and Nora did it. So it was done by MDs.
For one more, the similarity and differences, where did you generate those standout units?
So we gave GPT-4o Mini.
So this one is just quickly. For example, if you list 5 differences between the first and second abstract.
Yeah. So we prompt GPT, but instead of the embedding, then it gets the actual abstract. And then 2 abstracts. So it's a pretty straightforward task for it. So then we just train it, we supervise fine-tuning. For our results, first I'll introduce the metric, then tell you about baselines and some ablations that we did. So we used, as in the Google paper, semantic consistency, which is essentially cosine similarity. So we'll start with our gold standard. So our Oracle has created a plain language summary. We've embedded the abstract and had CT-LLM, now frozen, use just the embedding to do the same task. And we embed those outputs and we look at the cosine similarity. So similar to BERT score, pretty straightforward. Is it the same semantic content? As a baseline, inversion of embeddings is not a hugely studied problem, but probably the most popular tool so far has been vec-to-text. This is an iterative workflow where you have 2 models. The first generates an initial text hypothesis from the embedding, and the second model takes in the target embedding that you want it to be, or that you want to invert. It takes the current hypothesis, so some text, and then it takes the current embedding, like that was generated by the initial model, and it's trained to make edits to that text to make the current embedding look like the target embedding. And with some iterations, like 20 iterations, it can do this pretty well and recover the real text. But it's pretty limited. It's only trained up to 128 tokens. It's also a general domain model, although they did show some experiments for biomedical data. Because it's so limited lengthwise, we try to give it a fair shake by doing a section-wise pipeline as well, where instead of the whole abstract, we keep it split. We embed each section, and we let vec-to-text do each section individually. And it'll give some text, and then we just concatenate the results, and we call that the prediction. We also fine-tuned it because it was open domain. So that gives us 4 variations, whether it's section-wise or not, and whether it's fine-tuned or not. For ablations, we tried a lot of different things to see how removing them would affect the training process. So first of all, a large data set versus small data set, 1 or 2 epochs. And we devised 5 tasks, but what if you only used some of those tasks? We looked at that. Training phases, the original paper proposed that you needed a 2-phase, they found that they needed a 2-phase training where they warm up the adapter first, freezing the rest. We wanted to test that, so we tried 1 and 2 phase. 1 phase being just train the whole thing end to end. And there's also a repetition penalty. It's a llama parameter in Hugging Face. It's an inference time generation parameter. And this value, if you set it to 1, is no penalty. 1.2, it penalizes repetition. We found that we needed that, or it would be repetitive. So this is our main results table. And you can see we're thankfully doing much better than the baseline. The biggest boost to the baseline is dividing it up by those sections, but fine-tuning does help if you don't do that. And you can see here, this thing is fairly robust. You can use 1 task or 3 tasks. The Google paper, I think, used 24 different diverse tasks, which require generating a lot of data. So this shows you might not need that many. But using more data does help a lot. And we also find that you don't necessarily need that 2-phase training. You can just train the whole thing end to end. So for example, this 1P, 1E is 1 phase, 1 epoch, and that's doing almost as well as the best one. So we carried this model forward for further analyses because these other ones take twice as long and you don't get a lot of return from that.
You said more, if you have more tasks, you improve the performance, but then will drop on the 5 tasks, right? Then reason behind it?
Which drop?
That's the performance, right?
From 3 tasks to 5 tasks.
On 3 tasks, 8 is 6.
Oh, so this line is 2 phase, 1 epoch. So that means it actually has twice as much training time as this one.
Oh.
So this one was just done 1 epoch of end-to-end training. This one is 1 epoch of adapter warm-up plus 1 epoch of full training. So it's
Plus 3 tasks at 1.
right. Yeah.
That's 8. That's
Pretty much the same. Yeah. So those are promising results, but we wanted to further validate this. This semantic consistency just shows we've learned some kind of data manifold, but we don't know, is this manifold actually a manifold of clinical trials, or is it very specific to these data? So kind of generalize in a useful way. So specifically, we thought of 2 research questions. First, can you map novel points to plausible clinical trials? Just like picking a point in the middle of 2 movies, do you get a real movie that could be a movie? And second, are the clinical trials that we generate responsive to direction? So this is like the extrapolation. There's a funny direction in the movies? Is there a direction that's clinically relevant in our space that we can move the embeddings along and see the results in the output? So for the first research question, we analyze the plausibility. So this is kind of a Turing test. So we have 2 abstracts. We start with 2 abstracts. We embed them. We interpolate them. So now we have a novel abstract that's never existed. And we ask our CT-LLM to generate it. Now we take a real abstract, some other random real abstract, and we shuffle it with that. And we task a discriminating agent to say which is the real one. And if it can't tell, then presumably we've made an abstract that could be a clinical trial, even with studying that disease and that population, et cetera. We're currently using agents, LLMs for this, but we're also working on some human experiments. We don't have the final results yet. So against the LLM, our win rate is 40%. And this is not Llama 3 8 billion, this is ChatGPT. So we think this is pretty impressive. Just as a quick example, here we have 2 abstracts. We're mixing them, again, only with the embeddings. CT-LLM only sees the embeddings of these, and we ask for the background section of the interpolated. And you can see it's made something that sounds pretty plausible, but it's mixing elements from both. It's cognitive behavioral intervention from this one, but the right one was talking about patient withdrawal, so now we have medication adherence. Depression outcomes are for the first one, but it's on patients with poorly controlled hypertension, like in the second. So for the second question, does it respond to clinical directions? So we use concept activation vectors for this. I won't go into exactly the details of what those are, but essentially It's the normal to a decision hyperplane of a classifier, a linear classifier. For example, for male and female cohorts of a study. So for this, we have to find that vector first. So we found a bunch of studies that were either on male or female subjects, excluding sex-specific topics. So studies that could be on either sex, but they just happen to be on one. We also did some augmentation to make those kind of more symmetrical, asking GPT to flip the sex. Then we take all those data, we embed them. So now we have embeddings representing subjects or studies with male and female subjects. We feed those into a linear classifier, and we find that we can classify them pretty well. So there is a sex direction in the embedding space, and we know what that direction is from the classifier. So we'll call that our CAV. So now we take both or either embedding, an embedding of either a male subject study or female subject study. We add this sex vector to it, just like as if it was the funny movie vector or the animated movie vector. And we ask CLM or the CTELM to decode it. And now we have what we hope are flipped. So the male ones will now be female, the female ones will now be male, all from the embedding space, just with math. And then we verify that with, again, GPT.
The kind of trying to see how we can integrate those embeddings.
Yeah.
Just based on the male female.
Right.
Control the output.
Yeah. And I'll get to the future direction as well.
Does that mean we can kind of more ask you to output more like a guided, towards like a guided output?
Exactly. And what we're doing right now is identifying a time vector. So we can say, what if you add a year or 10 years to this topic? What is the topic going to be? So for our results, this is starting with an embedding, adding the male vector plus some alpha for the strength to get E prime. We prompt the model to make it. And now here we have the original abstracts in ref, just as a sanity check. They are all classified as female. And you can see the more of this vector we add with alpha getting higher, the more the output has male subjects in it, or some neutral subjects as well, meaning didn't mention or includes both. This works in the opposite direction as well. If you start with male studies, you add negative alpha now, the opposite of the sex vector, and it writes abstracts with female studies. And the semantic consistency here in the black is showing that it does stay at least kind of close to the original abstract in terms of content. Although the more you change that vector, the further it drifts, which is not surprising. We did the same thing for age. I don't have a lot of time to go into it, but essentially it's the same idea, but you start with children, and adding a vector for age makes the subjects what they call aged in mesh, or vice versa. So next, as I already mentioned, we want to use this for future generation. So here's an old study, here's a new study. What do you think is next? You can do that with this vector operation. We also have a couple other ideas like generating synthetic data like clinical notes in certain underrepresented areas, or compressed RAG, as I mentioned. So thanks to especially Xiang, who did a lot of the engineering work and experiments, Yujia is working with us on the human annotation, and my mentor, Dr. Xu. Thank you.
Questions?
We force change the gender, right? We can't go there, set it up. I'm just wondering if we forced it to change it from male to female, but how do we know if generate text is valid? I mean, generate the hypothesis. Valid.
What we do manual review.
I'm just wondering, like, when you force the change, because I think that the idea is, I want to more see like, oh, if we put constraints like, oh, it has to be about this gene, this drug, right? What kind of new hypothesis coming? Then by adding those vectors, you can have those names, the gene drug name show up in the general hypothesis, right? But how do you also validate the hypothesis?
Change your
Value.
Okay.
Even after you force it to change it.
Right. One thing we're looking into is the type of tasks that we train it on. So if you train it on being able to be prompted with generate a hypothesis based on a certain field. What do you think the hypothesis is?
Yeah, even if they have a case study for gene or something, maybe.
I'm talking about embedding decoding. So how accurate is the embedding? So if you use like the embedding from the abstract you are not trained from untrained data set. So how accurate will be this embedding model? And is there any translation or other false information in the data is unknown?
So out of distribution.
Yeah, out of distribution.
That we don't know, and I would guess that it's pretty specific to the distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. It's really interesting. So for the MathCPT, when we train previous model, PubMed user logs, we find one observation that, for example, it's robust to new PubMed user queries, but it shows higher semantic scores for PubMed sort rather than other sorts. For example, if you do maybe a clinical guideline or other data sources, the semantics vector generated give a very different distribution than PubMed. So maybe some kind of obvious, but I don't know. There's some observation.
Yeah. Because I'm just curious, because for the LLM models of embedding in very low is the input from to the space. So if we like compress all the information into just one token, that's sufficient to like memorize all the informations. So yeah, so that's why I asked the auto distribution question. Yeah.
And thanks. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Xiang, and I'm a new postdoc in Dr. Xi's lab. So I will share my most recent work from my PhD, which focused on empowering the multimodal large language models for grounded ECG understanding. So here are some backgrounds. The cardiovascular disease are one of the leading causes of death globally, and usually when the doctors to support its diagnosis, a standard 12-lead ECG is commonly used to track the heart electrical activity across 12 different angles. And this provides the clinicians with a comprehensive view of the cardiac functions. So when the abnormalities are detected on the ECG, they often reflect some disturbance in ring or maybe conductions and may point to the underlying heart disease. So for this reason, the early and the comprehensive diagnosis using the ECG is critical, and enables the timely intervention and improve patient outcomes. So in the real clinical practice, interpreting the ECG is inherently a multimodal process. So the machines with automated algorithm will analyze the raw ECG time series first, and including detecting the peaks and intervals to generate initial diagnosis hypotheses. And physicians then review and validate these findings by examine the 12-lead ECG images. So bring these two perspectives together is very, very essential for making reliable and accurate diagnosis.
What are the difference between those two data modalities? To me, it's all about the waves, right?
Oh,
One is
one
image, one is the continuous time series data.
Yeah, one is time series signals, and another for the cardiologists, they usually use the printouts, so it's an image. So human perceives this data in image format.
Okay, in the left side, more like a time series data.
Yes,
like
yes.
Data points, but on the right side is condition look at is the image.
Yeah, it's a paper format.
But the source of this to generate those data is same source, right? It's
Yes.
source.
Yes. Yeah. So current models, they mostly rely on single ECG modality, which is often the time series signals, and they overlook the benefits of integrating, combining all available modalities such as time series images and textual reports. And this model, they lack the language capability, so making them very inconvenient for both the doctors and patients to use. And most importantly, these models lack the language-based explainability. So they fail to link the predictions to specific waveform features and articulate their reasoning process. So our goal here is to develop a language-based model for ECG interpretation that allows not only doctors but also like regular users to understand their ECGs. And this model needs to integrate multiple modalities, just like in the real clinical practice, where the ECG time series provides high resolution signal analysis and ECG images for user-friendly applications, such as taking a photo with a mobile device. And this model should deliver high granularity interpretations, providing detailed and clinical meaningful insights rather than only coarse or binary outputs. So what should a high granularity ECG interpretation looks like? So we identify 3 essential properties after extensive discussion with physicians. So first, the interpretations should be feature grounded, where the findings are explicitly tied to the detailed ECG features, like waveforms or intervals. And second, the diagnosis should be based on clear evidence. And third, the reasoning process should be realistic and simulate how the clinicians analyze ECGs and arrive at a diagnosis. And to achieve these goals, we have we're facing 2 key challenges. So the first one, from the data perspective, there was no existing high granularity ECG instruction dataset suitable for the large language models training. And second, from the model perspective, we need to determine how to effectively integrate time series images and the text into a unified learning framework. So here is an overview of our proposed solution, which addresses both challenges. The first highlight is our instruction data generation method. Because there's no high granularity dataset exists, so we created one ourselves. But the question here is, how can we generate detailed and clinically relevant instructions in scale without relying on human expert? And our solution is the knowledge-guided instruction data generation method. So we started by extracting the ECG features such as waveforms, amplitudes, and intervals from each heartbeat in each ECG lead. So in this process, we used a commercial-grade algorithm to ensure the accuracy of the extracted features. And these features are compared into a time-ordered sequence and passed through a diagnosis scatter, which provides the cardiology-specific instruction prompts, such as the physician guidelines. So this ensures the detailed analysis of each aspect of the ECG data and incorporates guidance reflecting the real-world clinical guideline and the diagnostic process. So in this way, each prompt is customized to the ECG features of a particular sample. So this ensures precise activation of GPT-4o's latent medical knowledge in generating accurate and personalized target answers. So using this approach, we generated 30,000 high granularity ECG instruction samples. So here is a comparison showing the advantages of our instruction data. So existing ECG instruction data are derived from the original human written reports, which lacks reference information such as the ECG features. And as a result, these data sometimes provides incorrect explanations maybe due to hallucinations, which can arise when the large language models has limited reference information when generating target answers. And our data can provide the feature-grounded analysis and evidence-driven diagnosis, and also it simulates the realistic interpretation process. So with the data ready, the next step is to enable the model to understand both ECG time series and the images. So we design a multimodal encoding and with a dual encoder structure, one encoder for the ECG time series and another for the ECG image. And we perform a cross-model alignment learning to connect these modalities, where both representations are mapping into the same language space of the large language model. So during training, the LLM and the alignment module are updated, ensuring a efficient and a coherent learning across different modalities. So with this architecture and the data, our model offers superior granularity in the ECG interpretation compared to the state-of-the-art models and also the human written reports. So here are some details about the data generation and the training setups. So for data generation, it takes around 6,000 input tokens and about 300 output tokens for each sample when querying the GPT-4o. And for training, we use 8 A100 GPUs and roughly takes 20 hours per epoch. And we only train one epoch for each model. For the base language model, we use the Vicuna 7B pre-trained from Lava. And we applied a full parameter fine-tuning strategy. So the training of GM includes two datasets. The first is ECG instruct, which contains about 1 million ECG text pairs sourced from 4 different datasets. This data help to build the model's basic language capabilities related to the ECG tasks. And the second is our ECG grounding, contains 30,000 high granularity ECG instruction data. which builds the model's grounded ECG understanding capability. So here is how we evaluate our model. So the first is our proposed the grounded ECG understanding test, which includes 8 clinically meaningful metrics designed after discussion with the cardiologist. And this evaluation is conducted using the GPT-4o with carefully designed guidance to ensure the accurate and scalable evaluation. The second is traditional cardiac abnormality detection tasks and the report generation and the QA task. And the last but not least is human evaluation. We designed 7 metrics and involves 8 cardiologists to evaluate our model. So let's look at the results from the grounded ECG understanding task. We evaluated GEM on 2 data sets, the Mimic4 ECG and the PTB-XL. So Mimic4 ECG serve as the in-domain test set, where the PTB-XL representing an out-of-domain test set with different data distributions. So we compare our model GEM to a state-of-the-art large language model trained on ECG, and we evaluate 2 variants of our model. The SFT Lava uses a language model that's not pre-trained on ECG data, while the SFT Pulse uses one that has been pre-trained on the ECG-related tasks. So yeah, from the results, we can see that both GEM's variants outperform the baseline, and especially on the out-of-domain PTB-XL dataset, where the diagnosis accuracy shows a clear improvements. We believe this indicates our model's reasoning capability, which enable it to generalize effectively and make accurate diagnosis across diverse data distributions.
I have one question.
Sure.
In this case, if the large language model trained with ECG or without, the difference is kind of similar. I'm just
Yeah.
What's kind of underlying?
Actually, we explain this in this way. We think this is because the current data does not support the reasoning task we propose. So it shows the very similar results. Pulse is the state-of-the-art large language model trained with ECG task.
Okay. What's the performance on Lava itself without any cannot do anything.
We didn't test it.
Probably a meta channel.
Yeah. So here are the results for the traditional cardiac abnormality detection task. So we evaluate on 5 data sets, and even the SFT Lava version, just like I said, which has not seen ECG data before training, achieves competitive and sometimes even superior results, despite being trained for only 1 epoch. And in the report generation task, GEM also showcase its exceptional report generation capabilities, achieve large improvements over the Pulse in the PTB-XL report. So this result evidence that GEM's capability in delivering accurate, holistic, and also the clinically aligned interpretations. Okay, so we conducted a structured human evaluation covering 3 sources of outputs: the GPT-4o generated data, the DeepSeek R1 generated data, and the GEM generated interpretations. So in total, 400 ECG grounding data and 200 GEM's interpretations were reviewed by total 8 board-certified cardiologists using 7 predefined clinical criteria designed to assess both reliability and usefulness. So this unified evaluation protocol allow us to assess the quality of GPT-4o generated training data and test the effectiveness of open source alternatives, and also validate the clinical utility of the proposed GM model. So here are the expert evaluation results. So we can see that GPT-4o consistently achieve high score for both reliability and clinical usefulness, and with very strong performance in completeness and the reasoning quality. And we also evaluate the DeepSeek R1 and found that under our data generation pipeline, it achieved even higher scores than the GPT-4o. And this further highlights that our method is adaptable to different language model backbones and remains applicable in the setting without access to commercial APIs. So finally, in our evaluation of GEMS-generated interpretations, the model consistently scored highly across the reliability and the usefulness metrics, with most rated above 4 out of 5. So these results, so we can tell from these results that the proposed model is able to deliver a clinical meaningful and accurate interpretations aligned with the cardiologist's expectations. So here is an example where the GEMS interpretation surpass the expert expectations by identifying the details that were not noticed by the cardiologist. So this case highlights GEMS, also highlights the GEMS, the superior granularity in the ECG interpretation, and also show that GEMS potential as a reliable cardiology assistant. And here are some discussions and future directions. So firstly, the large language model as a judge may introduce potential bias. And in future, we plan to mitigate this bias from 2 aspects. The first is to evaluate the same outputs with multiple independent large language models to mitigate the stylistic bias. And the second is to scale the human expert evaluation. And in addition, some experts mentioned that the large language models used in this study sometimes exaggerated the severity of certain cardiac conditions, so which could cause unnecessary concern for patients. So this is actually a very interesting findings and points to a potential future direction in improving the language models to account for the emotional or psychological impact of its outputs. So to summarize the contribution of this project, so first we proposed the first unified ECG model for the grounded ECG understanding. And second, we created the ECG grounded data size, which established the first high-resolution resource for the ECG understanding. And we also introduced the grounded ECG understanding task, which is clinically motivated benchmarks. So overall, these contributions will establish a foundation for future works in language-based diagnostic AI for ECG interpretation. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. So my question is about the image part of the ECG. So what in your opinion, what actually matters the most in terms of the image equation? What I mean by that is the shape of the image matters, the shape of the curves matters, or actually the values of the curves that represent matters. For example, like we can have like two images, they may have different shapes, for example, but they may represent different values. Like for example, I can just change the shape by change the magnificence of the shapes. So yeah. Does it make sense?
Okay, so your question is about what matters most for the model in terms of the image?
In terms of the curved shapes, for example,
Okay, I think here the thing is for the okay, in this project we added the images for two main reasons. The first is to provide a global information because you can have the whole 12 leads in one image. So and you can use the image encoder to learn this global information. So that's the first reason. The second reason is we want make it easier for the users to use. So people can just take a picture to interpret their ECG. So as for your question, what matters most, I think is maybe a different research question to see what part of the representation was activated for the ECG interpretation task. And we didn't look into this specific question in this study.
that's cool. Okay. Also, like how do you perform like the development of the DeepSeek? Because I don't think it is about creating images to
The DeepSeek R1 is just use the text as input. We evaluated using the model generated outputs. So okay, so in the data generation, there's no image. There's only the texture information. So we don't need to use a multimodal large language model to generate the data. And we did a test using the GPT-4 with images, and the performance is similar. So we just use the text prompts as input.
I have a question regarding your architecture. You said you have the same data source, right? One is time series, one is images. So you in that the image that you just passed, your architecture, yes, this one. So you have your ECG encoder, which has the time series data, and then you have your image data for that same raw signal. When you try to do cross-modal alignment learning, you are creating a representation of that image to a certain dimension.
Oh, that's a very, yeah.
And again, for the raw signal, you're doing the same, right? And how are you creating that final?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So yes, the image is derived from the raw signals, but we did data augmentation to make it more realistic, like the paper, the printout, used in the real world clinical settings. So
basically, so in that case, whatever model you pass it through to create that representation, so you concatenate that later, or
yes,
in
concatenate.
that case, wouldn't the image data and the raw signal data be the same?
Oh, this is just a.
You're just concatenating the same data together and putting it into your image projector.
Yes. Oh, are you?
So those are not two different data information or two different representation. It's the representation, but just the representations are same, just the source are different.
The representations are different, and the data are sourced from the same ECG signal, so sourced from the same sample. So one sample can has two different modalities. One is the raw time series signal, and another is the image. So how we get the image? We generated the image from the source signal and adapt the data augmentations to make it looks like the real world printout ECG images. So the representations are different.
So your first image is from different leads in the ECG, right? So like PR, PQR, and stuff, QRS, etc., right? And the second, the image is, the image is by superimposing all those lead signals into one. That's how you get the image.
So sorry, could you please repeat?
No, the time series, the first one, each image is from one lead in the ECG, right?
Oh yeah, this is for the illustration. In our implementation, we use all 12 lead ECG.
Yeah.
Yes. And the image is get from the 12 lead, the whole data, the whole 12 lead signals.
All that, and how about the second one, the image, the rows? The second image, how did you generate that one?
We use the algorithm to generate synthetic images from the raw ECG signals.
Oh, I see. Like the superimposing each lead image into one, then you get the
Yes.
QRS kind of
Yes,
thing.
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
What are the biggest challenge when you're training this multimodality model? Because here alignment is not a problem, right? We're coming from the same data source level. What are the main challenge when you train?
Main challenge during training. I would say training is not a challenge.
No challenge.
The main novelty is how we derive the data set. Yeah, the main
What are the main challenges?
the main novelty is here. The main novelty is here. The main challenge is here. How we get a high granularity instruction data without relying on the human expert annotations.
Basically derive this training data,
Yes.
most important.
Yes.
Oh, I see. From the signal you generate these values.
Yes. This is exactly how the commercial machines, ECG machines, doing inside their algorithms.
I'm more from the clinical side, but can you go back to like towards the last slide where you had the complex interpretation coverage questions? Can you go to like your last slide where you have like the text interpretation? Because like the ground truth came from the clinicians, right?
This one is from the clinicians. So it's a ground truth report.
And then the blue is what the clinicians missed.
Yeah, the blue, the highlighted in blue is where the clinician missed and didn't notice by the expert when we doing the human expert evaluation.
Yeah, just one curious question. So for example, if I take a picture of the ECG and it's very blurry, so I send that to the model. Will the model say like it's very blurry, so I can't understand the image, or do I just take something?
Good question. We didn't test this. Yeah, I think
you have a QC module before this.
Yeah.
To identify. Tuesday is for change.
That's qualitative information.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah.
Last question.
What about implementation? If we do think you really can implement to the clinical side for physicians to use this?
From
One, I think the EEG model developed here at the law, right?
Yeah.
It goes through like FDA, what's that, approval or something like that?
But that's for disease diagnosis.
Yeah, it's for diagnosis.
It's new.
yeah.
I think first you should have the show really good disease, robust disease diagnosis actions.
Yeah, so it has not reached to that, actually, yet, but. We will down into the report.
Thank you, Xiang. Thanks, everyone.